What is going on YouTube? Welcome to Red's Exotic, where I do exotic pet feeding, tutorials, guides, and exotic pet vlogs. Today I'm going to be explaining the best beginner tarantulas to get into the hobby. And also in this video I'll be suggesting, like, it can be like an old world or new world, but with this video I'll just be suggesting that can be kept as for a beginner that wants to get into the hobby. I know people can be like a bit more touchy with the subject of old world and new world if they're like new to the subject. This is my experience, so I'll be suggesting what I've experienced so far when I first got into the hobby. So anyways, let's start with, terrestrial, fossorial, and then arboreal and semi-arboreal. Let's start with terrestrial. So with terrestrial, they're your typical tarantulas that love to be seen out in the open. For beginners, I'd suggest like a couple of your curly hair tarantula. Like, you can never go wrong with this tarantula. Most of the time, like when it's young, it tends to be a bit more shy, so it tends to burrow than the usual. But once it hits like that juvenile stage and then that adult stage, it tends to be a bit more confident in his or herself, Usually mine loves to like redecorate everything, and it's just unbelievable because mine just like moves the water dish here and there, and then I just ignore it, That's one tarantula I'd suggest for like, terrestrial. And then another one would be like specific tarantula I'd suggest would be like, the genus of Brachypelma. These are your like Mexican tarantulas, and these tarantulas tend to be like just most of the time like for display. And I'd suggest like the Brachypelma hamori, Brachypelma smithi, all these three tarantulas are usually like available most of the time for sale in vendors or dealers near you, and they're more common in hobby, so it's kind of easier to find them out there. And then let's move on to fossorial. Fossorial tarantulas are your tarantulas that love to burrow, and they can live all of their life in just inside that burrow, or they can move from this burrow to like find another different burrow. That's basically a fossorial tarantula. I've only kept a couple of fossorials, so the only fossorial I'd ever suggest would be Amphibians semani. She's a female and she's already an adult, and she eats lovely. Like, she just gives me good, amazing clips. So she tends to be usually a bit more like when they're young and they're slings and everything. For me, they burrowed a lot. They make this crazy web tunnels, and then they just disappear for months at a time. And then let's move on to like arboreally. These tarantulas are the ones that tend to live up in the trees, and like they prefer a bit more like height than length and width. They tend to live their entire life in the trees and just webbing around those trees, making web tunnels around those trees. So some tarantulas I'd recommend that I've kept personally would be like, your Carabina versicolor. This specific tarantula tends to love to make crazy web tunnels, and then when it's young it has that blue coloration, and then as it turns into an adult you tend to see a bit more different coloration, like with different carapace, body, and over time with each molt it shows different colorations than the previous molt. And then we have the avicularia, or like your common pink toes. Currently at the moment a Avicularia minatrix, but it's like a cousin of the Avicularia. So these tarantulas are the same as like your Carabina versicolor. They tend to prefer a bit more height than length. They still make that amazing web tunnels, so you'd have no problem if you want like a tarantula that's for display, and then that's usually out in the open. This types of arboreal tarantulas, they're usually kind of shy if you don't provide them enough space, and they tend to be a bit more skittish if you don't provide them enough space. But overall, when I've kept this two specific tarantulas, I've never had a problem. Sometimes they can be like a bit more camera shy, but yeah. So let's move on to the next one. We have the semi-arboreal tarantulas. These tarantulas are the ones that tend to live in between of two worlds, if that makes sense. They tend to live on arboreally and then on the ground too, like a ground dwelling type of tarantula. So these tarantulas are your like Chromatopelma cyanopubescens, your GBB. Mine, when I got it when I was young, it used to have like a green, like orange color of carapace on its abdomen, and then like all over its body and its carapace. And then as you see, like over time it hits like the juvenile and then adult stage, you'll see like that different colorations popping out on its body. So it went from just one color to like different colorations. And then like you have your Glaucotale diamentinensis, which is your like Brazilian blue dwarf beauty tarantula. It's basically the same as a GBB on how you'd keep it, but it has a bit more coloration than the GBB. But in exchange for that extra coloration, it's a bit more dwarf side type of tarantula. It's a bit more smaller than your, you know, GBB. But with this tarantula, they make amazing webbings if you're that type of keeper that wants to get into that hobby and just wants to see some crazy webbing and everything in the enclosure. These are the tarantulas that I'd suggest for that if you want to get into it. So yeah, that basically wraps it up. We discussed terrestrial type of tarantula. I gave you guys like suggestions on what you'd like to keep, and then I gave you guys suggestions on fossorial and then arboreal and semi-arboreal. These tend to be just my personal experience on what I've kept so far, and over time it can change once I've gained a bit more experience in keeping different types of species of tarantulas. But yeah, hopefully you guys learned a thing or two about this video. As always, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up on this video, comment down below, and then, you know, like if you guys have any more questions, I'll engage with you guys. And then as always, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in my next video.
There goes a sight from my soul.